Hi there. Today we're going to do lab a little bit non-traditional, a little bit different. Sometimes it's good to do things differently, but we are going to do the bandaging not in a classroom setting like we typically would. I today am going to walk you through all of the different bandages and all of the bandage material so that next week when we return to lab and practice bandages, you will be quite proficient in them. In this first video, I want to initially explain all of the common bandage material and some miscellaneous supplies that you're going to see when we talk and discuss and demonstrate the common bandages you'll see in veterinary medicine. From your reading, you have determined that typically most bandages are going to have 3 layers. A primary, a secondary, and a tertiary layer. 1, 2, 3. In the subsequent videos, you're going to see that for the most part they follow these three layers or these 3 rules. In the first layer, it is ultimately the primary layer has contact with the wound, if there is a wound. Primary layer is going to be one of 2 bandage materials. This is just a basic gauze square, and certainly it can be very absorbent. But if I had a wound here and I had a gauze square over this wound, when I was ready to remove this bandage, there is the possibility of this gauze sticking to the clot, and hence when we remove it, it could dislodge that clot. But nonetheless, this is an example of a primary layer. A more common primary layer is one known commonly as a Telfa bandage, but ultimately it's a non-adherent bandage or non-adherent dressing. It's like a Band-Aid, but just a really large one, in that the material will absorb, the exudate will get absorbed into this bandage material, but yet it's non-adherent so that when we remove it, it's not going to stick. Telfas are nice, just like gauze squares, in that we can cut them to whatever size we need. So those 2, gauze squares and Telfa bandages, are examples of the first layer or the primary layer. The secondary layer is one that can accomplish a couple different roles and responsibilities. The secondary layer is one that provides some cushion or some padding, plus or minus some constriction, like a big hug to the wound. If you are not feeling well, you get all cozied up in those blankets and nice and warm, and it promotes heat and healing. And so again, dependent on what our bandage is trying to accomplish, the bandage could A, have some padding, in some cases a lot of padding, and B, some constriction. Here are some examples of secondary layer. This is just muzzle gauze. So you're probably familiar with this one in SAM 1, where you used it to perform a gauze muzzle for those aggressive type animals. You can see here that it's very thin, so hence it really doesn't accomplish any padding. And if we needed to constrict this bandage, we need one that has a lot of give to it, a lot of stretch, and this has no stretch. So in reality, gauze muzzle is not commonly used with bandages, but I thought I would bring it to the table here today. But let's put it away, because you're most likely not going to see it. The more common secondary layers are something called cling wrap or cling gauze. And you can see here that it has some padding, more than what you just saw with the gauze muzzle. But if I pull it, you see it's got a lot of stretch. So good for bandages that need a little bit of padding, but yet a lot of some constriction. They have different manufacturers. Here's one that, I find it so nice and soft. And again, you can see that give. And you can see that they come in a variety of sizes based on the size of your animal, or more specifically, the size of your bandage. Another common secondary layer is something called cast padding. And if you've ever had a broken bone, one that was repaired with the aid of a cast, they put a protective layer, a primary layer, over a wound if there was one, and then they wrapped that broken bone in this cast padding, and then they put some Mod Podge, I don't know what the cast material, to harden it over top of it. Cast padding, just like I mentioned with the cling gauze, comes in a variety of sizes. I just brought 2 examples of sizes. You can see it has a nice layer of padding, but yet it doesn't have a lot of constriction. You see, when I pull it, it breaks easily. So this is adequate for bandages where you need some padding, but just a little bit of constriction. So again, our secondary layer so far, commonly cling gauze and cast padding. Another secondary layer that you might see, and specifically you're going to see it when you're doing bandages like the Robert Jones or the modified Robert Jones or the Metamason splint. This is called roll cotton, because ultimately it's just a roll of cotton. Now, this roll cotton is really good for bandages that need padding, but this doesn't have any give to it. It doesn't stretch. And so this would be not ideal for bandages that need some compression or some constriction. So, secondary layer, cling gauze, cling wrap, whatever you want to call it, cast padding, or the roll cotton. The tertiary layer, this is the one that's going to be most superficial, and ultimately what it's meant to do is to kind of certainly keep all of the other layers of the bandages kept together, but it's also meant to protect the wound or the problem, the reason why you're putting the bandage on, protect it from the animal and hence the elements. So if I put a layer of a tertiary layer over a wound and I take them outside, and let's say it's moist outside, it's wet outside, and this bandage gets wet, I can hopefully just replace that tertiary or superficial layer. Certainly, if you have a bandage on, such as if I had a bandage over my paw or my leg, I could simply put something over the entire bandage, take the animal outside so that the entire bandage doesn't get wet. But if it does get wet, hopefully it's just that tertiary layer, that superficial layer, so therefore you just need to change that. Back on track, the tertiary layer. There are 2 examples of tertiary layers. A real common tertiary layer is that which we commonly know as vet wrap, Coflex. It goes by a variety of names. This particular wrap comes in a variety of colors and also sizes, and it has a lot of compression when you initially take it out of the package. And so you're going to see that when you are demonstrating the actual bandages and when you need to use vet wrap, you usually unroll it first to let up on some of that compression, because if you don't, you're going to tend to wrap that bandage too tight, and that's not going to aid in the healing process. Vet wrap, again, is going to be the protective layer, and it's one that is going to stick to itself but not going to stick to the animal, so that if it gets on some of the fur, which you would want to in most cases, when you remove it, it's not going to stick to the fur and hence pull that fur out. This is an example of vet wrap. Real fun. I have it at home in Green Bay Packer colors, so neat. Another example of the tertiary layer is this product called Elasticon. And when you work with it next week in lab, you're going to see that it's really sticky. So yes, it can stick to itself, but will also stick to the animal. Sometimes you want it to stick to the animal to maybe you know that dog is kind of an idiot and is going to molest that bandage. I use idiot with a lot of love. This is Elasticon. And ultimately, with a lot of your bandages, especially this one, when you need to cut it, you have to actually cut it. You can't rip it. Bandage scissors are ones that have a little protective layer at the end of the scissor so that when you're removing the bandage, you're not going to cut the animal's skin. And that can be very commonplace when you use traditional bandages. So whenever you're working with bandages, and especially removing them, you always want to use bandage scissors. Some other supplies that you're going to see as we progress through the different bandages is tape. You might need tape. And tape, like you can see here, comes in different widths. With a couple of the bandages, you're going to see me use some tongue depressors. And also in small animals or for small fractures, ones that are repaired with the aid of a splint. This is just one example of a very basic splint, but let's say if I broke my finger, I might just use, the veterinarian, the doctor might just use a tongue depressor and then wrap my finger. So you could use also tongue depressors as splints for, again, small fractures, small animals. But you're going to see me use this with the Robert Jones, modified Robert Jones, and the Metamason splint. And again, I already mentioned things to protect the bandage. Once you have the bandage placed, protect it from the elements. And ultimately, if you wrap the bandage to take the dog outside to do their business, when the animal returns indoors, you'll want to remove it. Here's just an example of an IV bag that we've modified with some cling wrap that we could tie to secure it to the limb. Some veterinarians are also recommending things like saran wrap that press and seal. So you could use that to protect the bandage from the elements when you take them outside. So that is a brief introduction of the common bandage material. And now that we have that information in place, we can proceed to the specific bandages. So you're going to see those specific bandages in the subsequent videos. Thanks very much.